8, 7.
Good evening and welcome to the Starboard Portal. Thanks for joining us. U.S. Sailing is honored tonight to be hosting tonight's panel focused on increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the sport of sailing. I'm Peter Glass, Chief Marketing Officer at U.S. Sailing, and I wanted to begin tonight's session by reaffirming the importance and the commitment of working together towards positive change within the sailing community. We have been listening and learning and understand the need to take action to address the barriers and inequalities that exist. And although we have taken some initial steps, there is much work to be done. Therefore, U.S. Sailing will be outlining action steps moving forward that will be released later this week. And we look forward to working side by side to create a supportive and inclusive community. We're really fortunate to have an engaged DEI committee, a DEI task force, and on behalf of U.S. Sailing and a passionate staff, we want to thank them for the guidance and leadership. And specific to tonight's panel, I'd really like to thank Karen Harris and Amy Sinclair. They've really worked hand in hand with U.S. Sailing to make this evening's panel possible. And I'd also like to thank all of the panelists, both Joe and Lou and Bill when he joins us as well. This panel will be the first in a series of panels, and U.S. Sailing would like everyone to stay involved and engaged. So as a way to facilitate this engagement, we encourage you to join U.S. Sailing and continue to participate in the conversation. And right now, I'd like to introduce Amy Sinclair, who is tonight's panel moderator. Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Peter. I'm really excited to be here. Really energized that we're having this discussion. I think it's long overdue and something that we've all been really excited about and waiting for. So I'd just like to say hello to everybody who's joining us today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm sure we have representation across the country. Thank you so much to U.S. Sailing for putting this together and for all the other unseen people who are behind the scenes who helped facilitate this and get us off the ground. Thank you for that. I'd also like to just introduce some of the panelists that we have with us today and really thank them for making the time to do this. I'll start off with a woman who doesn't need a big introduction or many words around some of her accomplishments. They are vast. So first of all, we have Karen Harris with us, who is the immediate past Commodore of the Jackson Park Yacht Club, Vice Chair of the U.S. Sailing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, Senior Vice President and General Counsel of the Illinois Health and Hospital Association. I don't know how you're able to do all the things that you're doing. There are quite a lot. And then also, 2017's one of the most influential minority lawyers in Chicago, according to Crane's Business Journal. Welcome, Karen. We also have with us Joey Harris, who is the manager of sailing for Chicago Park District and leads programs including an adaptive sailing program. He is the former sailing program director at the Grosse Pointe Yacht Club and a series of other yacht clubs as well. And he's received quite a few different awards. In 2014, he received U.S. Sailing's Community Sailing Award for developing an outstanding adaptive sailing program. And then also the 1998 U.S. Sailing W. Van Allen Clark Jr. Trophy for being the National Sportsman of the Year. We also have with us Lou Sandoval, who is the Commodore of the Chicago Yacht Club and former chair of the Chicago Yacht Club Race to Mackinac. He's also a U.S. Sailing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee member and member of the National Board of the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, Sail America, and the Recreational Boating Leadership Council. So I'd like to welcome all of you today and thank you for being with us. It's, you know, as we open up the program, I just want to give a couple moments to some of the things that we're going through in our country. COVID and this pandemic has affected all of us. I think if you don't know someone who has it or who has passed away, you know someone who knows someone. And it's also impossible to miss that there's protests around the country around things like the Black Lives Matter movement, LGBTQ rights. And there are just some people who are not with us today simply because of what they look like and what they believe and some of the things that are important to them. And as sailors, I think we have a very unique perspective in that we are not just bound by land, we are out on the water, and the water makes up such a large percentage of the earth and it connects us all. So we have this great opportunity to come together as an industry, a sport, a community, and try to figure out how we can solve some of the issues that we have with us today. So without further ado, we'll move into the panel, but I also want to let you know, if you're joining us through YouTube, please drop any questions you have into the YouTube comment section, and we will try to get to them towards the end of the program so we can make sure that we're having an interactive experience for all of those who are at home viewing this and have questions to help them figure out how they can move forward with diversity in their own communities. Okay. So I think the best place for us to really start out is to talk about diversity. What is that? With us today, we have Karen, who is going to help us run through some of our slides. And so you'll see our screen change in a second. And it'll go through some of the definitions of what diversity is. So first, the first real word that we're using here is diversity, and that has many meanings. It's embracing differences, which can lead to innovation. There's a great example of this where if there are two people and you ask them, where do you put the ketchup? If one person says it's in the cabinet and the other person says that it's in the fridge, you're going to look at different places to figure out how to get that ketchup and solve that problem. And so I want to turn to Joey and ask you, what does diversity mean for you, and how have you seen it lead to innovation in some of the work that you've done?
Yeah. So again, I always feel like I've got a real unique view on a lot of this. Not only sailing as a young person, sailed in college, and then I've run a number of different programs across the country. Now back down here in Chicago. So I've seen a lot of different stuff in a lot of different places. And I think that's probably the beginning of diversity. And the one thing that this has had as a common denominator has been the sport of sailing, like you brought up before. So, currently the largest program that I run is the adaptive sailing program. And we also do a lot of outreach to other groups as well through some of our other partners, like the Endeavor Chicago program. But it's really looking at trying to get different people from different backgrounds all accessing the water, especially as far as I'm concerned. I look at it as one of our greatest resources here in Chicago. So just getting everybody on the water through our park district programs, and in that way we're bringing the entire city. And Chicago is such a diverse city with people with all different backgrounds and ideas together. So it allows us, I think, to look at these problems that we have, or again, looking at how do we get people on the water in a much different way, or I should say in a much eclectic and inclusive way that I think a lot of other programs really haven't been able to look at. So for me, it's just figuring out how to get more and more people from any sort of area on the water if that's what they want to do.
Okay, great. Thank you. The other major word that we're utilizing here is equity, which can be interpreted in different ways. But generally speaking, when we think of equity, we think about fair treatment and removing barriers for equal access. So there's a lot of different thoughts around what that means when we say the word equity. But the best example that I've heard that I think would be helpful to share is, if my hand is burned, what do I do to treat that? Do I put ointment on my entire body, or do I just treat my hand? And if I treat my hand, how does that help me as a human being function? That can lead to me being able to be more um, resourceful and able to do things. And so this idea of equity really is finding the piece that needs the treatment and trying to get it to a place where it can function and help the whole group. And so, Lou, I want to go to you and talk through some of your experiences, because you've had an extremely successful marine dealership. And had you not gotten into boating and working with some of the companies that you partnered with, you might not have we might not have seen some of the major effects that you've been able to put in the Great Lakes and join some of the organizations that you've been a part of and make the impact that you've done. So I'd love to hear more about some of that work and how you feel equity has been really important for you and helpful to the community.
You know what? Thanks, Amy. I've been really blessed to take the path least travel. So a lot of my, my seat at the table, we'll say, has been predicated by results. And in buying this mom and pop dealership that we bought, we were able to get the opportunity to take advantage of some programs to be able to fund the purchase of the business. Pivoting from a corporate career into being a business owner was a big step, jumping off that diving board and into the pool. But once we were in the pool, the opportunity to meet a lot of great people and build fleets. There's two fleets that are still fairly active today. The Beneteau 36.7 fleet and the 40.7 fleet were built during our tenure on at the dealership, and those are two of the largest fleets in the country. Throughout the course of the life cycle, one of the boats, we probably sold well over, close to 40 boats, between the new ones and the used ones. So, it's still a very active fleet, but, it was bringing a lot of different fabrics of different people together. And, it opened up a ton of opportunities, continued from that on to be involved in, leadership councils and a lot of other organizational opportunities within the Yacht Club and, being a volunteer there for 20 of the 21 years that I've been a member. But, it's interesting when you get into these, we'll call them into the club, we'll call it figuratively speaking. I think equity really takes place when it's one thing to be in the club, but it's another thing to be in the club. And, to use a Hamiltonism, to be in the room where, the decisions are being made. And I think that's where you're able to really shape a lot of the impact. Recreational Boating Fishing Foundation is embarked in a phenomenal effort to try to get people of color out onto the water and get them out fishing, partaking in that. So that has been a great passion of mine, seeing that kind of come together.
Okay, thank you for that. One of our original panelists that we had planned to have with us was Bill Pinkney, and he may be joining us a little later. But I think the other important word for us here is inclusion, which is about creating these welcoming environments so we can foster ingenuity. And one of the amazing things that Bill has been able to do, in addition to being the first African-American to single-handedly sail around the world, which is awesome and incredible all in itself, is that he was the captain of the Freedom Schooner Amistad. And through this awesome partnership that he created with PBS and several other corporations, they created a television special that could retrace the Middle Passage slave routes. And when they created that special, the other thing that he did is he brought teachers on board the ship so that they could experience the trip firsthand and share that with their students, which had an extreme positive impact on many communities outside of just those who watched the special. It also had great impact with the students who were able to keep tuning in and checking in with their teachers along the route. And so in creating opportunities where we have a welcoming environment, we can create more opportunities like this to do interesting, creative collaborations. So we talked a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are really important aspects to what we need to do to move sailing into a more equitable space. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about like what some of the normal definitions of diversity are that might get us stuck into one pattern. So Karen, please let us know what are some of the common explanations that we tend to associate with diversity.
So one of the things when I try and explain diversity and inclusion and sort of the difference between the two is, so diversity is getting invited to the party, right? So it's making sure that we're invited to the dance. But inclusion and equity are making sure that once we get invited to the dance, somebody actually asks us to dance instead of just sitting us on the wall. And that's really how I define the different terms. And the other thing that I sort of want to move us in is to talk a little bit about what diversity is not. And one of the big things that I want to stress to everybody is diversity doesn't equal charity. And when people call me and start asking about, you know, how would I might go about helping to diversify my yacht club, my sailing program, my, you know, organization, when I start talking about diversity, sometimes I get the panic look in people's eyes, like, how am I going to be able to afford to set up a scholarship program to pay for youth to, you know, sail for free? If you want to do that, that's great. And that's one way to do some things about diversity, but it's not the only way. And we're going to talk today a little bit more about other ways that you can do diversity. But diversity and charity are not equal. You know, myself, I was fortunate enough to go to Princeton for undergrad, Harvard for law school. I'm general counsel of the Illinois Hospital Association. So I represent all 211 hospitals in Illinois in the middle of COVID. And I make money. And I can afford to pay for yacht club dues or buy a boat or those kinds of things. And there are many more like me who can do that. And so I think one of the things that we really have to understand is when we start talking about diversity, it does not mean that you have to give something away for free. What we're talking about is that we're going to make a welcoming and open environment for people and remove as many barriers as we can so that we get as much diversity of perspective, whether it's gender, ethnicity, ability, sexual orientation as possible.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to mention. A lot of times when people start thinking about diversity, they go straight to the part where it's like, okay, well, in order to get other people in, we have to figure out how to fund their way in. When actually, you know, there are quite a few other groups that aren't on the water who could be there and can afford to be there. And it's just a matter of like creating that space and really understanding why diversity is so important and why it should really matter to sailing and why we need to prioritize this. So I'd like to go over to Lou and see if you have some thoughts around why sailing should really embrace this.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of really, really good reasons why sailing should embrace diversity. And you know, the great thing in these two photos depict that is you know, the generation, you know, my kids' generation that's growing up today is growing up in probably one of the most multicultural environments. So they're seeing less and less of the divisions that have been historic, you know, other than the ones that I think sometimes we put on them as adults. But you know, they're used to kind of being in a multi-ethnic environment, multicultural environment. And you can see this picture here is a picture from the Junior Race Week from last year. And these are all the people that kind of placed, and you've got people from every single club there in that photo. But you know, the sailing's facing, you know, some headwinds, and even in the pandemic, you know, we're seeing a little bit of an odd effect in the industry right now, where there's a big boom in boat buying, and you know, there's a lot of interest because there's something else to do on land, right? But you know, I think dovetailing into what Karen has said that, those of us that have the capability of getting on the water, we realize how blessed we are and how privileged we are, but we also understand that we're just scratching the tip of the surface. As you can see, participation's been down. It's been fairly flat over the last 5 years. And these are the most recent numbers that kind of came out. Next slide. When we look at overall sailing participation, there's about 3.7 million people taking part in the sport, and those are over 6 years old that have at least sailed one time a year. The core sailing participants, they're about 1.1 million, and they've sailed about 8 times a year. If we looked at the entire U.S. population that went sailing in the most recent year that we have data for, complete year data, it's about 1.2% of the general U.S. population. The big footnote on that is, that 0.1% of the sailing population is diverse. So we've still got some road to travel on that, and continuing to expose more youth to the sport. The immediate easy one is gender, because it's half the equation, but we can make some big strides on that. Next slide. When you start looking at participation insights, we're doing so on gender. It's getting better over the last number of years, but we can obviously still do better on that. You see the general age population of the people in the sport, 25 to 54. The core participants are, we'll call them the diehards, or 55 or older. And those are the people that grew up with the sport. And then, the interesting thing about sailing is that, about a little less than half the sailing participants have a household income of over $100,000 per year. So that's, that kind of starts to draw some dividing lines. And then, when you look into the sailing participation, the participants, their educational background, a lot of them have attended college and they have a bachelor's degree or greater. Next slide. So when you look at the breakdown by region, you can see, there's a lot of different identifications of different areas where we've seen growth. The Midwest is probably, one of the larger areas. A lot of people think sailing, it's very coastal, but the third coast, as we call ourselves here in the Midwest, has a lot of participation. And then obviously where you'd expect it down in the Southeast and up in the Northeast, we have a ton, and out in California. But you can see where a preponderance of the sailing participation is nationally. Next slide. But why diversity matters most of all. And these are some numbers that we borrow from some of the market data that's out there. We're going a major culture shift in the country. The move away from owning things to shared services, or basically, renting things, or, just think of Uber. Did we ever think that we would jump in somebody else's car and go for a ride? The same is happening to boating. The move to fractional or boat clubs or different things like that there's a big move away from that in boating. And our demographics are changing, and the numbers that I cite here on the right are numbers that came from the Seelig Center for Economic Growth. And these are the numbers in 2018. The arrows indicate the forecast. And when you really look at overall multicultural buying power is estimated at 3.9 trillion in 2018. And that's forecast to go up another 200% by 2023. When you look at Hispanic buying power, it's currently in 2018 is at 1.53 trillion, and it's estimated to go up to 1.9 trillion by 2023. For the Black community, it's at 1.31 trillion, and it's estimated to go up to 1.6 trillion. And again, Asian buying power, again, at about 1 trillion, just a little bit over that, and it's estimated to go up to 1.3 trillion by 2023. So just in those 3 buckets, we'll call it, there's a lot of buying power. There's a lot of opportunity to get people out on the water, stoke their passion for getting there, and making it a pleasurable experience. Lifestyle changes, of course, people are a lot busier these days. So obviously getting out, getting with a boat, people like to boat on their time. That's affecting the sport a little bit in terms of, some of the groundswell organizations. And then, aging demographic of stakeholder participants is a big factor. In summary, I guess, diversity it makes the sport better by sharing that with the people that can, take on the passion that we have. Next slide, Joe. When we look at the world around us in terms of the demographics, You know, when you look at birth rates, and these are all the different factors that take into account, you know, diversity. When you look at the white non-Hispanic population, the birth rate's flat to declining. In America as a whole, the African-American birth rate's flat to declining. You know, 1 out of every 4 kids in kindergarten today is of Hispanic heritage. Single women make up 18% of new home buyers versus 10% for men. And those numbers are actually going up again. These are 2018, 2019 numbers. The American population below the age of 20 years old is about almost a third of the country. And there's another one that kind of really is affecting the ability category, because in 2019, we had 4.7 million veterans that came back stateside. And of those veterans, 25% of the total had a service-connected disability. So these are individuals that we can get out on the water and have them, you know, regain some, you know, some passion in their life. And it helps with the, you know, water has a very soothing and healing effect. So, I mean, there's a great opportunity to get different people out on the water, and that's just on top of people that are born with disabilities as a whole. But that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Lou, for helping us understand some of the economics behind why diversity is a great thing for the sailing industry to embrace. And then just outside of the economics, there's the pure joy, the pure enjoyment of it, right? of wanting other people to experience that. There's the healing quality of like being out on the water. But certainly the economics definitely do sort of side us on the equation of wanting us to take a deeper look at why organizations should think about things a little bit differently. And so there are quite a few myths around why this effort might not make sense. And so I want to take us through a few of some of those myths. We have Bill with us now, Captain Bill Pinkney. Thank you for joining us. And so, Bill, I would love to have you share some of the misconceptions that persist about sailing and diverse communities.
Well, one of the things that I've heard, there are a number of jokes about things that are of small dimension. And one of them is Black People I Met While Yachting. It's supposed to be one of the shortest books in history. But that in reality is not what it actually is. People of color have been involved in the maritime and sailing in the United States since before we were even a country. The watermen, the people that actually ran the ships and did most of the sailing were people of color. It's not unusual to find that people have maritime heritage when you look at some of the low country people in South Carolina. So there are a lot of myths about Black people and sailing that are just been overlooked and have not been presented properly. I know that every year for the past 20 years, we've had a group that goes down to the British Virgin Islands that has as many as 120, 125 Black sailors from all over the country going out and sailing. And these are not people who have very large incomes. Some of them are professionals, some of them are civil servants, some of them have their own businesses, but they are involved in the sport of sailing. So there are a lot of things that people believe. Those of us who sail are not all rich, we're not all white, and we don't own boats. Because with the charter business now, people can get a group together and go sailing. The question is, do they know how? And I think that's something that needs to be focused on, is bringing young kids into the sport of sailing. Because if you don't know how, it's not like driving a car. You just don't get in, point it, and go. And I think one of the opportunities for sailing is for teaching, and teaching young people not only to sail a boat, but teaching them self-reliance, teaching them the understanding that sailing as a sport itself has a great educational platform. There are a number of groups that are now doing programs that involve science, technology, mathematics, geography. All of those things are involved in sailing, and they are peripheral to the actual art of sailing. in and of itself. So there are a lot of things that people say about sailing. Usually those are not the people that are sailing. And to dispel some of those myths, there are a number of groups around the country. Lou was talking about a disabled group. And Chicago has one of the Goldman programs been going on for a number of years for disabled people. We have Shake a Leg down in Miami. Has been doing a tremendous job with veterans. So it's an inclusive possibility that people should not assume things about sailors that are not necessarily true. We are a diverse group within a very small group in a very large group of sailors. And what we look to do, I think, is to increase that diversity and increase the number of people that are starting out young and learning to sail. I found going around the world in many countries, people start sailing at a very young age. And we're not talking about places that have yacht clubs or sailing clubs. We're talking about that have the opportunity just to get out on the water. And most of the places in the United States, East Coast, West Coast, South Coast, there's water everywhere. It's just a matter of getting the people to the water and the water to the people to show them the possibilities.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. So, you know, one of the things that I think is very important for us to just sit and acknowledge is that we are not, as an industry and as a community, where we need to be, right? We could be more diverse. We could definitely be more inclusive. And that is definitely problematic. So I'd like to just go around and just have some of us share some of our experiences of what that has been like. And Bill, I'm so glad that you've joined us, because we can start with you. For those of you who don't know Bill and aren't familiar with him, as I mentioned at the top, he's the first African American to solo circumnavigate the world, and he did that back in the 90s. He is also a former Commodore of the Belmont Yacht Club. He served in the U.S. Navy for 8 years. And in 1999, he was the Chicagoan of the Year, according to Chicago Magazine. So we are in great company to have Bill with us today, but also because he's been in this a lot longer than the rest of us. And so I'd love to have you share a little bit of like what it was like in the past as you were making all these, you were breaking all these barriers.
Well, a couple of things. One of the things is that I am not the first Black person to sail around the world. However, a young man in St. Croix, Teddy Seymour, went through the Panama and Suez canals in the late 80s to complete his circumnavigation. I'm one of the crazy sailors who did it the hard way. That's going around the southern capes, including Cape Horn. We're the crazies. We are a very small group. As far as the United States is concerned, we put more men on the moon than we've had sail solo around the world. So that's one of the things. I found that even though I have sailed in a lot of different places, at the beginning it was very difficult. My sailing started here in Puerto Rico, where I live now, sailing on bumboats. At the time that I was here, just after I got out of the Navy, we were sailing, they were sailing produce and hardware from Puerto Rico to St. Thomas, St. Croix, and the other out islands. And they were done on little wooden schooners that were built here. And I used to bum rides on those to go over and see the other islands. So that's how I started. But the infection got a hold of me, and it just went downhill from there. As far as really being able to talk about what the experience was like, there were very few sailors in Chicago when I finally came home from the service and lived in Chicago again. When I was in Belmont Harbor, I was the only Black sailor there. There were only 5 or 6 in Jackson Park, and most of the blacks on boating in Chicago were motorboaters. They weren't sailors. I remember we had a group that came over to my house one time for a meeting of what we called the Mystic Knights of the Sea. And those who are my age, 80 some or more, would understand who the Mystic Knights of the Sea were. But we were a very small group. There were probably maybe 5 or 6. But as I traveled a little further, I started to find more and more black sailors, but they were still rare. As far as incidents were concerned, I was very fortunate. I had very few. Although I did have what may be considered a funny incident right there in Chicago. I was watching Commitment Down, which was the 47-foot Valiant that I sailed around the world. I was at the dock at a local yacht club, I won't name it, but I was watching the boat down and a guy came up to me and said, "Boy, you're doing a good job there. How much would you charge to wash my boat?" And I said, "No, I'm sorry, you couldn't afford me." And the guy looked at me and said, "What do you mean I can't afford you? I've got this big boat over here." And when I said, no, you can't afford me. Maybe you can afford the dollar and cents thing, but you couldn't afford the fringe benefits that I get. And he said, "What do you mean what fringe benefit?" I said, "I get to hang out with the owner's wife anytime I want to," at which point he turned red and left. But that was one of the big things. It's the assumption that when people are seen, black people are seen around boats, that they work there or they are just looking around to get in mischief. And that is not the case. And I found that was not what I found when I went to other countries, particularly South Africa. South Africa, I expected to have a lot of problems there because it was 1990. Apartheid was alive and well. Nelson Mandela had only been out of jail for about maybe a week when I got there. But I found that there is a certain camaraderie among sailors, particularly offshore sailors, that looks past race, religion, that sort of thing. Because once you go to sea, it's the same for everyone. That's probably the most equal opportunity place that you can ever get anywhere on the face of the earth. And I found that throughout the country, and I've had a chance to see a lot of different places and a lot of different sailing groups. And I find that that is something that once you are seen as a sailor, you're generally invited in to the club. And it's not the yacht club, it's the sailors club. We don't talk about the people that sail those other boats that make smoke, but that's another joke altogether.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like everybody on this panel has had some sort of experience that left them feeling a little uncomfortable, to be kind, about what some of the experiences have felt like, including myself. And a lot of times when I am at events, I do get asked for things as if I work there, and it is really a hurtful thing. And if our hope is to bring more people into the sport that don't look like the people who are already in it, these are definitely some of the things that we will need to address. And so I'd like to move over to Karen and Joey, because you guys kind of grew up sailing. It's not something you did later in life. So you've had an experience of your own as what it was like to be kids in this environment. So I'd love to have you share a little bit about that experience.
Okay. So when we first started sailing, we were about 9 and 10 years old, and our mother decided to put us in sailing school, and we were the only minority kids. This was back in the 1980s. We never really had any kind of bad experiences, but we were certainly conscious of the fact that we were the only minority kids in the program. And interestingly, at the time, Bill was in Chicago, and he was Commodore of Belmont at the time. And unbeknownst to us, and I didn't find this out until I was an adult, he would come down and watch us sailing, just because we were the only minority kids around sailing. And he also, wanted to make sure that we didn't run into any problems. And I didn't find that out until we were sailing in the British Virgin Islands together a couple of years ago. That Bill did that for us. Yeah, you didn't remember that? And the other thing that I'll say is just a real quick story. So I was, as an adult, at a post-race party at a yacht club, and we were getting ready to leave the party, get back on the boat, go back to our home yacht club. And somebody stopped us and said, "Where are you going?" And we said, "We're going home." And they said, "Well, what are you doing getting on that boat?" And we said, "Well, that's our boat." And they said, "Well, you know, who owns it?" And the guy who owns it is a big 6'4", about 300-pound guy. You can't miss him. And he's standing right in your face. And he says, "You know, I own the boat." They literally thought that we were going to steal this boat from the yacht club. Now, what I found funny about that is, how am I going to steal a boat if I don't even know how to sail it, right? It's not quite the same as hijacking a car. But those are just some of the experiences that we had. And Joey, I'll let you say something.
So just, you know, again, I always feel like I've had a very unique life in many different ways. And I won't spend too much time on it, but, you know, hopefully we can meet you guys at some point and tell you more stories. But, you know, I sailed in college, and, you know, it was at the time, you know, far away from home. So just kind of the getting to college thing was kind of nerve wracking. But I went to University of Rhode Island, and at the time, the prior year, they had just won nationals. So I always feel lucky that I always feel like I had a very good sailing education. And, you know, I was always happy that that the people that I was actually sailing with on the team, I think, you know, recognized the uniqueness of me. And in a way, I think I was again, a little guarded from, you know, some of the things that were going on out and around me. But I did get a few real good conversations going with people who would come back from events and kind of say, you know, one really struck me, and they're like, "It's a good thing you didn't go to that event." And, you know, when we talked about it, they talked about how, you know, they did some extracurricular activities, and people were throwing around the N-word like it was no big deal. And the kids that I was at school with, you know, really were shocked, because again, you know, I think people just don't recognize where or how deep these things go, and they try to explain, well, we've got a black kid on the team. And, you know, they looked at them and said, well, yeah, well, what does he do? Like crew or something? They're like, no, he actually drives. You know, so it was always kind of interesting going into, you know, different clubs and things like that. Just with the looks that you got when you, especially, you know, I felt for me, got on the helm. And I think, you know, I always felt like people looked at me and said, oh, you know, at least I'm going to beat this one guy. And then usually after the second race, especially in college, you know, you rotate after every 2 races. And all of a sudden people were coming over and talking to me and introducing themselves, saying, hey, who are you? When, you know, before they didn't give you the time of day. But, you know, since then, you know, luckily enough, you know, again, you meet some really good people. And that's one thing that I love about our sport, is that we're very close to our, you know, our role models, or our heroes here in this sport. So it's great to see that, you know, those people kind of come up to you and talk to you, and you can always use the, you know, who do you know game. And I think as we get into this, and hopefully I think it'll be the next step, is how do you make people feel welcome who don't know these people, who don't know the integral or, you know, deep people in our sport. So I think that's an important step that we need to take.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, the other thing that's really important, I think, to share is just what that experience is like for younger people. Like, we're all older, right? So we can probably shake some of these things off and move on. But like, as a kid, if you have that experience where you're uncomfortable in any kind of way, you are definitely not coming back. And a lot of people, when they think about sailing, really feel like a lot of focus should be driven around getting you into the sport when you're young. So I definitely want to give voice to that. And so, Lou, you know, I think you might have a unique perspective on some ways that we can try to address some of these things that might make groups feel uncomfortable, and maybe you can share some of your experiences.
You know, it's interesting, Amy. Thank you. One of the things that I've had the blessing of doing my career in thirds. You know, the first third was done in corporate America. The middle third, I pursued my passion of owning a business that happened to be in the marine industry. And, you know, you get used to being the unicorn, or taking that path least traveled. And, you know, a lot of people kind of look at you like, all right, well, you're that one guy in the room. And, you know, in my career, I've had to go to different parts of the country. for trade shows and the like. And at times, so I've now made this my career, so, at times I've had people say, what are you doing here? Your kind doesn't belong here. I mean, you get different comments like that, and it's not in the parts of the country that you would expect, it's in parts of the country that won the Civil War. So, it's interesting. And, and we've all got the story like Bill and Joe of going into regattas and having people kind of ask you to get them something, or going into a regatta and your wife and kids are asked, what are you doing here? And they're right in front of you, and your white crew ends up walking ahead of them, and they're asked, okay, well, what are you doing here? Well, no, we're going in with them. And I walk up to the security guard and say, is there a problem here? And they're like, no, where are you guys going? I said, they're actually, those guys there are on my boat, and these are my wife and my kids, and we're all going in the club. And you kind of see them turn all different shades of different colors and of embarrassment, and and then you just kind of go by. But those are hopefully far and few between. And it's the world. As a dad of 2 daughters, I hope to leave my legacy in changing the world for them. But I think that there's a lot of great opportunities to kind of have extend mentorship to people, especially because in the marine industry and in the Midwest, we see there's a huge skills gap. You look in our country right now, everybody kind of wants to go to college. Nobody wants to go to trade school, and that's great. You can go in and get yourself into 6-figure debt, but there's some very good careers that you can get into. Joey's a classic example of he's pursued his passion. He's become a well-known coach, but coaching is one avenue. You could become a professional executive in the marine industry as well, but we need to kind of provide pathways to mentorship on that. And there's some really good programs out there that do that. There's the Sea Scouts, there's, a lot of the STEM programs now are starting to open up, young people's eyes to, the possibility and the tie-in of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics into the sport and into a potential career in sailing. But it's changing little by little. It's changing. We've all got our sad stories. We try not to dwell on the sadness. We try to look at the great points. I think in general, I like Bill's comment about, when you become part of the sailor club, or the club, it's great because you talk about sailing and you probably talk less about the other stuff. But it's still there, and it's, you don't like to be, and being Hispanic, it's even different for me because, the Hispanic community it's fairly diverse in itself. We've got an Afro-Cuban contingency, an Afro-Puerto Rican contingency that are very, dark complected, curly hair. And then I've got cousins that are blonde hair, blue eyed, 6'5", and they have a lot of German blood in them from, Guadalajara. So, that's just kind of how it is. And so we kind of sometimes fly underneath the radar, but it nevertheless hurts when you end up getting into a scenario where they say, oh, or they drop a joke about the waiter or somebody, and it's it's just it has no place.
Thank you. So great. So we've addressed the elephant that's in the room, and now I think for us it's really important to figure out how can we move forward, right? This is an extremely complex, very large issue. And so Karen, where can we start? Where do we start?
We're playing with the clicker over here. So one of the places that I think we can start is we need to look internally, right? So doing an internal diversity audit and understanding where you are and where you want to go, and then thinking about how to get there is sort of one of the first ways that you can address diversity issues. If you're going to be able to do something, you have to have a plan to do it. It just doesn't materially happen. A whole bunch of diverse sailors are not just going to walk into your yacht club one Saturday afternoon just to see what you're doing. I was talking with somebody who's not diverse about these kinds of issues. And what I explained to them was, a bunch of Black people are not just going to say to themselves, I wonder what's going on at the yacht club today, what those people are doing over there when they've never had any experience sailing. They're not just going to walk over on a Saturday and say, hey, I wanted to find out what was going on. No more so than a bunch of non-diverse people are going to say, wonder what's going on at that Black church on Saturday morning. Think we'll just go show up. And when you think that that's going to happen, nothing's going to happen. So you really have to have a plan, and part of that plan is looking at where you are, and then, you know, start thinking about how you can change that. And we're going to spend a lot of time, we're running late, but we're still going to spend time on this session talking about some real practical things that people can start doing in terms of, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion activities.
Okay, thank you.
The-
Thank you for that. Okay, so definitely a lot of challenges, and definitely a lot of different ways for us to think about how to change things. So let's talk through that. You know, how do we change things?
I think visibility is the biggest thing. Those of us who are in the sailing world or in the marine industry need to talk to people who are not in it, and keep that conversation open so that they can get a better idea of the possibilities, and talk about how we enjoy it. Talk about it with our friends and our associates who have no idea, no understanding of what it's about. Because if you don't know, you have no reason to ask questions or to be inquisitive about it. We have to be visible, and that's one of the things I try to do as much as possible, is to be out there and let people know about sailing. The late friend of mine who started the Black Boaters things was a big advocate of that, getting out and talking to people on every occasion, starting with skiers. And that's how that organization got started. Skiers talking, sailors talking to skiers and saying, why don't you try this? It's not as cold and it's more fun, and you don't have to wear as many clothes. And that conversation led to an organization that was the Black Boaters Association. The other thing is that for clubs, I think that clubs may have activities that are inclusive, not specifically of going to minority groups, but going to the general public, and within that general public, draw in people of different backgrounds. And because it always seems like such a forbidden place to those who are not involved.
Okay, thank you. And so Karen, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that U.S. Sailing is doing, because there's a commitment here. We have this panel that we're doing today. There's several panels that will follow this. Let's talk through what some of the initiatives that are happening over there with U.S. Sailing.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Peter Glass, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of U.S. Sailing, explained at the beginning of our session, U.S. Sailing is actually going to be coming out with a statement on diversity later this week, and also some outlines of initiatives. But just some things briefly that I wanted to mention. Lou and I are both on the DE&I, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of U.S. Sailing. That committee works with the U.S. Sailing Board of Directors and the sailing community of the U.S. at large to create and support activities to promote diversity, both at local organizations and elsewhere. So that's one way that U.S. Sailing is taking some steps. If you have questions, or if you want to talk to any of us, you can reach out to the DE&I at ussailing.org email address to email us. We look forward to discussing and conversing and continuing the conversation with you. If you go on to the next slide. Another thing that I think is a really great step that U.S. Sailing has done is the Seabull Sailing program. Well, actually, I'll take a step back. There's the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion page on U.S. Sailing's website. So if you haven't visited, please do. Go to the next slide, please. One of the things I want to point out on that page is that we have U.S. Sailing has stood up a resource page. So it's a number of resources, books, webinars, podcasts, best practices, identifying some organizations that are currently doing diverse things within their sailing world. If you go to the next slide, these are the main names of the people who are on the diversity committee. So if you're trying to get in touch with somebody in your area, you can contact any of these people. We're more than happy to talk with you and share best practices, as well as learn from you what you're currently doing that you think others need to know. So for example, if you go to the next slide, Joey, this is the resource page that we've put up at US Sailing. So there are things that you can listen to, watch, read, explore, learn about national and regional organizations that are doing diverse things in sailing and elsewhere. And then there's a discussion forum. So there are ways that we can keep this conversation going. And if you go to the next one, on the middle of the page in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webpage on US Sailing's website, there's a button, and I really want people to find this and use it. It's share your best practices. The only way that we are going to overcome historic years of not being diverse as a sport is if we all pull together and share resources and learn from each other and start building upon each other's work. This is the opportunity that you have to work with us on that. So if you go to the next slide, you can fill out this form and basically, tell us what's going on. Tell us things that we don't know about. We want to make this information available to others. So I really encourage everybody, go to the website and give us information. Tell us what you're doing, what you've heard of, or things that you need, or things that you think we should be doing as US Sailing and as a sailing community. And if you go to the last slide here, this is the website for the youth sailing program, the Siebel Sailors program. This is another initiative of US Sailing, which I think is very important. The Siebel Sailor program is basically a grant program that US Sailing has put out. They picked 5 cities, and within those 5 cities, about 4 or 5 different sites were selected. And the idea is that those sites got brand new boats, RS Vivas, and access to a US Sailing coach. And really it's trying to bring more diverse youth sailors into the sport. My organization, Jackson Park Yacht Club Foundation, was one of the organizations that were given a grant here in Chicago in the Midwest. There are other sites across the country in 5 different cities. And this is a phenomenal program. It just launched this year. We had our first session of Siebel Sailors last session. We have a session going now. And this is, I think, a fantastic initiative of US Sailing and shows their commitment to really trying to make a difference in terms of diversity.
Okay, thank you. So let's jump into some of the practical steps that people can take, because that's some of the questions that are coming in are around that. And for all of us, I think we will agree, everyone on this panel, that when we're thinking about a practical step on how to make sure people feel like it's a welcoming space to come in and create programs around that, it's a top-down approach. It really starts at the leadership level. And there are different ways for us to figure out how to do that and recruit more people to come into the sport. So I want to just open it up to Lou and have Lou maybe go through some of the organizational strategic ways that we can think about getting more people into the sport.
Thank you, Amy. One of the things that we're doing on the task force and the committee is we're starting out with a plan, because you fail to execute what you don't plan. So we're going to create a strategy that will have measurables in it. And, we're going to measure what we expect to accomplish. And I think every organization has to kind of do that, because you have to kind of look inwards and say, all right, so where are we? And then, how do we get to where we want to go, and set some goals for yourself. But in going and setting goals of going after some of the, the categories that might be defined as diverse, there's some common pitfalls that you can do. And this is a framework that, I've used in a couple of different organizations that I've worked with. It's an outreach and inclusion model. And then I'll use this just for lack of a better example, but, politicians are notoriously horrible at this, because what they do is they go in at the top level and they say, hey, I want a photo op with some kids and I'm going to put it on my website, because look, I've got friends, and that's not what you want. You know, those are, you know, you make, you know, acts of tokenism, symbolism like that are just not, that's very superficial. You want to go really far down in this pyramid and make sure that you're seeking to truly understand the community, that you're not making any assumptions, that you're not making any, you know, you don't have any misconceptions. You identify the stakeholders in those communities, who are the organizations you want to partner with. You get to know more about them. You drive, you know, awareness in your own organization. You have what might be perhaps some conversations with them. And then you secure stakeholder buy-in within those organizations and then within your organization to make sure that there's alignment and that you have a pathway to bring them in and include them. And then it's a continuing ongoing relationship, just like anything else. You got to continue to nurture it and put time into it. And then you have that request to participate. And while it looks like a long pyramid, it really kind of happens fairly organically when you're just intentional about it. And, you know, like I said, you know, the failed efforts are the ones that start at the top. You really want to dig deep into the bottom end of that. And that's really where the best places are to start in this framework.
Okay, great. And so let's break down some of the different groups and go through different ways that we can try to approach them. So the group that comes to mind mostly when we're having this panel is ethnicity, right? That's the group that we really want to tap into and change things. So let's have Karen tell us some of those ways and some of those organizations that we can start reaching out to help with the effort.
So this one is, I think it works anywhere, just about, and it's a truly practical, and I tell everybody this, and I hope people are listening and actually do this. So if you want to grow diversity in your organization, one of the easiest ways to do it is to partner with professional minority associations. So for example, I'm a Black woman attorney in Chicago. I belong to the Black Women Lawyers Association. I belong to the African American Bar Association here in Chicago. If there was a club in Chicago that wanted to increase their diversity, you call the Black Women Lawyers Association or the African American Lawyers Association in your city and offer them space. We'll host your next quarterly meeting, monthly meeting, whatever you meet. The organization is going to come because who doesn't want to go to a yacht club, right? I mean, everybody thinks this is lifestyles of the rich and famous. So they're going to accept. And all you ask in return is 5 minutes on their schedule. You don't have to give them free food. You don't have to give them free drinks. You can if you want to, but you're just offering them space. And you get 5 minutes on their schedule and you tell them all the reasons why they should be interested in your yacht club, sailing organization, whatever it is. We've got youth sailing programs. We've got women on the water. We've got, you know, kayaks, paddleboards, whatever it is that your club or your sailing organization has. 9 times out of 10, some of them are going to bite. They're going to say, yeah, that sounds interesting. Sign me up. They can afford it because they're Black lawyers. That's the easiest thing that you can do. And you can do it with the Black lawyers group, the Black doctors group, the Black engineers group, the Hispanic, Asian. They're all there and they all exist in major cities across the country and even small cities across the country. You start there, and by getting that kind of people into your organization, it will grow organically because they'll enjoy it, right? You want to make it welcoming. You want to make sure that they enjoy their membership or their participation in your sailing program, or their kids do, or whatever it is that they're joining. But if they like it, then they start telling their friends, and their friends tell their friends, and then it just starts building. It's easy to do. Just look in the directory. And in fact, on the resource page, one of the things that we have is some of these national organizations that should exist in your city. So look them up, call them up, and start partnering with them. That's the easiest one I have for everybody.
Well, that's a great piece of advice. There are other organizations out there who are already doing some of this work that we can also tap into. Some community sailing programs, if you are a yacht club and you're an organization and you're not a community sailing center, it's definitely worth to reach out to the community sailing centers because they tend to already have some sort of program directed towards reaching groups that you might not be able to reach, specifically because of the lower economic barriers that community sailing centers create. There's also organizations that are rooted around environmentalism. There are tall ship organizations out there who do great jobs with recruiting young people and creating programs for them on board. And so a lot of times they also have solved some of these issues and they're great partners for you to reach out to. And then we can jump over to the other group that's probably the most obvious and largest group, which is gender diversity, women. We make up 51% of the population, and there is an easy way to access us. And so I'm the vice president of the National Women's Sailing Association, and I am also the CEO of Women Who Sail. And both of those organizations have pathways that can be accessed if you reach out to us on how you can get more women involved in the sport. Women Who Sail is a community of 18,000 women with various subgroups that are regional. So that's also a great resource for you, is to try to figure out how to tap into the Women Who Sail Facebook groups, because they are connected to women on the water. The National Women's Sailing Association has a program called Adventure Sail, where we go to different parts of the country and we bring out young women onto the water. And so this is another great place for you to figure out how to connect and partner with them, because this can also help initiate something where you don't have to like reinvent the wheel. They've already figured out how to do that. And so you can Google all these places and also take a look at the resource page on US Sailing site to learn more about some of their programs, because we'll provide information there for you. I also want to just talk about some other ways that you can think about involving women in your organizations. We can develop mentorship programs. I think, Lou, you mentioned that, where it doesn't always have to be an internal mentorship program. You can reach outside of the organization and try to find external mentors. There is plenty of women now doing things on the water that might not be associated with your club who would be willing to come. Actually, that's how I became involved with the National Women's Sailing Association. One of the members down in New Orleans reached out to me and asked me if I would come down there for an adventure sail program. And I did. I flew down there on my own dime. And I think you'll find that other women who are passionate about sailing will do some of these things because they just want to see the sport open up. There's other things you can do. You can create female-only regattas that will encourage women to get out on the water. You can mandate that races have mixed crews. Some of the races that happen at your club, you can say, all right, this particular race that we're doing must be mixed crew. And that right there, the team members and the captains will have to scramble to figure out how to do that. So that's one way to sort of like encourage it. You can run programs where you encourage women to become instructors, and then also figure out how to actively engage women into more senior roles in your organizations. Try to figure out how to get them on committees and boards. And then for those of you who are in the audience who have control over the media, I think it's really important to showcase more women sailors in your publications. And all of these things that I'm saying, they definitely jump past just women. They touch all the other groups, but these are just ways for you to start thinking about how to like change things, because it's very difficult for someone to imagine themselves into a future where they don't see themselves, right? So if there's no Black people in the pages of the magazines and you have control over that, that's a change that you can make. If there are no Hispanic people, if there are no disabled people on those pages, that's definitely something you can control. And if one of the first things that usually happens is, well, where do I find those people? How do I get in touch with them? So we will list organizations for you to reach out to that can help you with this. Women Who Sail has a subgroup called Women of Color, and we've only had that group for maybe about a month. There's almost 200 women in there now. 200 women of color who can help you figure out how to get access to some things like this. And then the other thing that we can do that's pretty simple, because sailing is such a social sport, is let's support more women-focused social events, right? We're in this COVID space now, so we can't necessarily meet in public safely, but we can host more webinars or Zooms where you highlight women who are doing amazing things in your club, and create maybe some storytelling events and structure around showcasing the women in your groups. So yeah, and I think the other major group that we want to touch upon would be youth sailing. And so Joey, I'd love to have you also share some really interesting and creative ways that we can get more youth out on the water.
So yeah, and I think you know, there's a lot of this going on. So when people are kind of reaching out to the other organizations that are around, I think what you're looking at is giving them easy ways to connect. There's, you know, I was just reading some of the comments, and one of them was about, you know, kind of physical barriers, right? So, you know, if we're at a yacht club or an organization that has, you know, fences or gates or something like that that you really have to go through, you know, again, one of the things we've found worked really well is to try and figure out ways to go beyond those barriers. So, you know, if you're trying to grab kids inside, you might want to think about, again, we're in a big city, so we're a little bit different because we've got a ton of people walking, you know, in downtown Chicago. So one of the sailing sites we put together is literally right at one of the busiest spots in Chicago. And although we're not taking people off the street, it again opens up that dialogue. So removing those physical barriers. But when you're working with schools or other outreach organizations that can bring kids in, it helps you to alleviate maybe some of the transportation problem that you will also engage with or encounter, I should say. But you also, again, start that bridge to other people who are doing it. So if it's again a school or a group of educators, you know, teachers talk to each other, and you know, you'll start getting calls from other schools or other areas where people would like to take advantage of those things. Yeah. So you can get into your school boards. But people are, especially now, I think, are really looking for other opportunities. Again, you know, not just for underserved, but of all kids from all sorts of different places. So we're looking at how you can, you know, tap into, you know, those resources in your city or your area and bring them in and continue on.
Yeah, and I'll say, for example, in our junior program, we'll have about 200 kids sail with us this summer. Hopefully, if COVID, you know, works with us. About half of those are minority students, and about half of them are on scholarship. We partner with a lot of different organizations. One of the reasons is because we're trying to tap into different neighborhoods, and so we find the organizations that are working with youth in the neighborhoods we want to target, and then invite them to talk with us and figure out how we can partner together, because they've already got the kids. We just got to get them to us. The other thing we do is we work with the Chicago Police Department, their community policing departments, and we bring those kids that they're already working with in the neighborhoods to us to sail. So for example, District 7, which is Inglewood, which is a not great neighborhood in Chicago, had 10 kids with us last session. So partnering with organizations that are already reaching the populations you want to work with works wonders, because you don't have to do that outreach. They've already got the kids. You just have to figure out how do we get them. And a lot of those organizations will have the transportation. And I've seen in some of the comments, and I'll touch upon it briefly because I want to make sure it gets answered. The other issue that people always have to address is swimming. And so swimming can be a barrier, right? So in some cultures, swimming is not a priority. Some of the kids don't swim as well. What we do is we really work with the kids to make sure that they are comfortable in the water. They don't have to be strong swimmers, because think about it, the whole purpose of sailing is to be in the boat, not swimming, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to teach them, is stay in the boat and sail it, not go swimming. We need them comfortable in the water. We need them comfortable in life jackets. So if we have to spend the first half day floating in our life jackets so that they feel comfortable enough to get in the boat and capsize it, that's what we do. I stick instructors in the water. I stick the kids in the water. If we have to go to the beach and do it there because it's, you know, more comfortable for them, that's what we do. But there are ways to work around it. And you can also partner with groups like the YWCA, who has swimming programs. So, you know, those are some of the things that you have to think through when you're trying to reach diverse youth, but there are ways to manage those.
Yeah.
If I could add one more thing on the youth thing. the thing that I think is probably most important, and we've seen great success with it at Chicago Yacht Club, is making sure that the coaching staff you have is reflective of the group that you have in there. And we have made a conscious effort to up our number of female sailors coming back and helping coach at the program. That has inspired a whole generation of little girls to kind of come out and want to sail. I mean, we saw it classically this weekend at the Junior Race Week. There were at every class, opties, 420s, the collegiate 420s, the lasers, every level had, I would say, the ratio of guys to girls was even greater with little girls. And that, I mean, because they have role models to look up to. They have, and then, if you make them diverse, like my niece is now a byproduct of the program. She's a collegiate sailor at Fordham University. She's now back coaching the sailing program. And she started this at that same sailing program. So now she's an inspiration to my daughters and other little girls in that program. So.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I also want to there's a couple of other organizations out there that are national that I think could help tap into making it so that we have more staff that's reflective of the groups that we're trying to reach. So if you're in the New York area, there's the New York Harbor School, which many people don't even know. That's a marine high school where the whole school is directed towards a curriculum around the water. And also that New York Harbor School model is a model that I think is being replicated throughout the country. So look for schools like that. And generally you'll find students who are already focused on those things. The other group that I thought was really helpful to mention is Outdoor Afro, which has a chapter pretty much in every major city. And so their focus isn't specifically on sailing, but kayaking and being outdoors and already just being familiar with the environment is a good place to sort of like try to source team members or people who might be interested in coming in and learning how to be a coach or a manager or someone who could work on a program for youth. And then the other great place for us to tap is also, and I've said this earlier, is the tall ship community, because I feel like they also have their hands wrapped around really figuring out how to engage with youth. So it's a great place to sort of figure out how you can recruit some competent sailors who are interested in doing other things besides just some of what they've been doing. And so let's also, jump over to another group that's really important for us to tap into, and that would be the LGBTQ community. So Karen, tell us some of the ways that you've seen as a good technique to try to make sure we bring that group onto the water.
So in Chicago, there's a group called Rainbow Regattas. Actually, they just changed their name to Rainbow Races. And it's a LGBTQ, I always get it backwards, organization that was founded by one of our Yacht Club members. And their whole purpose is to bring this community more into sailing. They do a Rainbow Regatta race that was put on our major race schedule. It's a fundraiser regatta, and those are some of the easy ways that you can start getting involved in getting that community out to sail. They're doing a rally this summer where they're just going to sail from one point to the other to promote more sailors from this community and support for this community. So those are just examples of here in Chicago what's going on, but I'm sure that it exists in other places as well, and we want to hear more about them as well. I know there's some others that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, definitely. I think there are quite a few different regattas that are specific around engaging the LGBTQ community. So that's one way to do it. The other way are to also engage the LGBTQ community is to sort of use some of the models that were already developed. There are some camps, sailing camps, that for 3 days at a time will focus on bringing LGBTQ students out to have an experience. And so here's a place where it's, they'll be with each other, and there's a comfort level in that. And so figuring out how to reach other organizations who have done that already, to figure out how to create those programs, and maybe reach out to like a local LGBTQ center in your community, or maybe there are some other like national organizations that might know of affiliate centers that speak to the same community, who can help you do some outreach, is another way to try to make sure you're including that group. And then the other thing that gets talked about a lot is the socio-economic barrier, right? Now, sailing doesn't necessarily just have to be for people who have a lot of money and can afford it. And so there are some creative ways that we can make this experience more affordable. And so I'd love to have Joey maybe share some of the experiences he's had around ways to do that.
So again, I think that, when I run into people who are looking to get into sailing, even if they're looking for lessons, I usually say, well, what level do you want to participate at? And so again, we run a public program with the Chicago Park District, so we're literally the cheapest game in town as far as price. But we're still a really expensive program for a Chicago Park District program. We charge $250 for 2 weeks for kids. That's all day for 2 weeks, and that's a lot of money for people, considering that our 6-week day camps are $160. Again, full day for 6 weeks, plus the kids get lunch. So when I'm more than doubling that for just 2 weeks, they're looking at me like I'm crazy. So if people are really interested, there's the ways, I guess, that I would say initially that you can get started is that as adults, most people who are sailing on boats, especially racing, aren't members of the yacht club. So if you are, again, gaining entry to the club, and if clubs are being welcoming, both Chicago Yacht Club here, Columbia Yacht Club, I would say every yacht club has a kind of a crew school. Each one has a little bit different name, but it's a pretty affordable way to come in. It's very social. You meet a lot of members. You get access to a lot of different people's boats. And from then on, you sort of have these friendships and connections to the clubs. And people are looking for people to sail with. So, they bring you out either to race or as a social venue as well. The other thing you're looking for is there are a lot of community programs. So again, community programs are priced at a much lower point, and again, are very welcoming to everybody to come in and join as well. We're looking to expand ours. We've got a for-profit company that was looking to move on, and we realized it would be a really big hit to the sailing community here in Chicago if nobody stepped up and took that over. So we were able to justify it in that Chicago Harbor's field brings in a lot of money. It's the largest municipal harbor system in the country. So we're not going to let that die. It's too important for us. So we're looking to expand into that program as well and be able to offer more to people at a much lower price. So I think it's important that people, again, do a little bit of digging. Also, use boats. You don't have to buy a brand new $300,000 piece of equipment. I was just thinking about it that I'm like, well, maybe I should look into getting a big boat. And there's a lot of stuff on the online for $3,000. So it's something that you can get into. You just have to sort of change your mindset, I think, a little bit and expand on how you want to enter the sport.
Okay, thank you. So I think we did a lot of talking about doing an internal audit of our organizations and taking a look at what we're doing. But I also think that it expands out past just making sure we have the right people on staff and that we have the right programs. I also think it expands into making sure that we have the leaders and the instructors trained around the sensitivities that they need to make sure this sport stays open and welcoming. Because I can tell you, just by being a member of the Women Who Sail Facebook group, maybe once a week, there's a post about a terrible experience that a woman has gone through in dealing with some sort of instructional, educational experience on the water. And so I think that as we look at ways to definitely make sure the sport is more welcoming, we need to look inward and take a look at our own organizations and make sure that we're providing them with the tools on how to think about, you know, not using certain language that might make somebody uncomfortable, or possibly thinking about different ways to make sure one group has more of a leadership and empowerment role when they come on board. So I definitely wanted to add that in. So, but I think right now what we want to do is take a couple of questions from the audience, and we've had quite a few. So we had one person who asked, in addition to the diversity problem, there are many practical barriers for anyone to gain exposure. Lack of access, proximity to water, lack of access to boats and equipment. Okay, so I think we just addressed that, but I also wanted to talk through different ways that communities have addressed making sure that we bring access to other areas that aren't necessarily close to the water. And I think, Joey, you had a great example of like what Chicago did in trying to make sure that there was more access to the lakefront. So some of the solutions to this could be at the municipality level or the state level for them to create more access to water in other places that don't always have them. I think you're on mute still, Joey.
Yeah, so, you know, I think we don't want to, you know, Chicago's in a very unique situation in that the founders of Chicago understood that the lake was a tremendous resource for the whole city. And not just the lake, but they also thought to put lagoons in many neighborhoods across the city as well. You know, the idea that the Chicago Park District had to make sure that everybody is literally within 10 minutes walking distance from a park, I think puts us in a very unique situation. But that doesn't mean that it's you know, impossible for other organizations or other communities to you know, find some ways to do that. Obviously, you're not going to be able to sail, you know, in the middle of the desert. But I think it is important to realize that, you know, if there is a interest, you know, there is a way. So, you know, look at, again, what other communities are doing. Maybe, again, it's, you know, it might not just be sailing, but maybe it's, you know, some sort of a boat building program. Again, we partner with, so does Karen.
Chicago Maritime Art Center.
Right, they do a great job. They build boats. One of our rowing centers, they build boats down on the south side with Karen, and it gets, again, a great deal of kids on the water. There's another organization out in New York, I believe it's Don't Rock the Boat, which I think was a fantastic organization. But again, it's figuring out how to get people access if you don't have it. So again, you know, building boats. We built Optis in our wood shops here in Chicago. And the cost was less than half. I think it was like $1,600 to build a boat plus a sail. Mm-hmm. So maybe if you go to your you know, local sailmaker, maybe they could sponsor a couple sails for you or something like that. And that's a, you know, maybe I think it was like $400. I mean, it was a pretty good cost just for the sails. So I think, you know, kind of get creative and figure out ways to get kids involved. And again, if you're just you know, getting kids into your individual clubs, you know, those might be some great activities that the members can bring on, and leave the boats with the club after they're done. So I think you know, get a little creative, and I think that'll go a long way as well.
Okay, This question is from John Keener. Is it better to start with lessons or just find ways to get people on the water first as guests and spectators so they can see what the sport is and see the fun? Lou, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's both. We're again, to Joey's point, I think we're blessed that in Chicago. You can, if you have regattas or races close to the shore, as we did when we had the America's Cup World Series, you can kind of see it close to shore. But in general, most of what happens in sailing happens, 3 to 4 miles off the the lakefront. So it doesn't make for a super awesome spectator sport. So I think that's where you kind of have to get to the lessons, because that's where you stoke the curiosity. That's where they realize some people don't know that they get seasick until they actually get on a boat or on a dock. So I mean, that's where you really kind of start to get into it and realize whether it's it's for them or not, and then try to work around solutions to kind of make them more comfortable in it.
Okay, great. Judy Ray Carlson is asking, how do you encourage the Yacht Club members that diversity is a benefit to the club? I think Karen, you might be able to answer this one.
So it depends a little bit on your yacht club, but there are two kind of arguments, right? So one Lou kind of outlined, which is from a financial perspective, this can benefit your club. So if your club needs more members, more money, then you need to find, more money, more members who can pay fees. And there's a whole untapped membership potential. And if that's, the way that you get diversity into your club, because that's what's going to sell it in your club, God bless, I'll meet you there, let's do this. That's one, way that you can make the argument for it, is from a strictly business point of view, you can get more members who can pay more dues, so the club has more money, therefore it's a good thing to do. The other way to talk about it is, if you want your club to continue long-term, then you probably have to start doing diverse efforts, because the demographics of the nation have changed. And so you can either wither away and die because they're just not going to be any more sailors, or you can start reaching out to women and minorities, because those are probably going to be your next members. So, or you can look at it from the third perspective, which is it's the right thing to do. And so depending upon where your yacht club is, pick your argument and make that case for them.
Yeah.
You know what, Amy, too, there's getting into the whole aspect, and again, I touched on it earlier, that not everybody that's going to be going in boating in the future is going to own a boat. Because I mean, those user buyer demographics are changing. I think, there is a concerted strategic effort on behalf of a club to make an investment in boats. And, we've done that through our sonar program. We have about 12 sonars now. And those have used, so if you are able to, pay for the membership, you have the use of those boats. And then we've created programming around that. That's our Women on the Water program. That's now in its 9th year. And it started out with 6 women, and now it's up to 40 women every Friday night that go out sailing. So that program has just exploded. My wife happens to chair it, this year, just, as a Commodore spouse, but it's gone from a 6-person program up to a 40-person program. And I mean, we're clearly oversubscribed in this pandemic type of year, but normally we're at 25, 30 women as well. So that's a classic way to get, just that immediate, and it's also good from a member retention standpoint, because they now have assets. Think of a golf club. You go to a golf club, you can rent clubs, you can rent shoes, and why shouldn't you be able to do that at a yacht club?
That's a very good point. So here's an interesting question from Baxter Smith. He says, sometimes you find a flag officer or two who's open to diversity, but who face resistance from older club members. Are there ways around that? So I would love to quote Karen Harris from another speech that I saw her give, and that is that if you can't start something where you are, then you need to go start a new program somewhere else, build it. And it sounds like, I know that's not an easy thing, but there are ways to get funding for building new programs. And so one person who's been really successful at this is Karen. And so at some point we will flash back to the resource page that we have on the DEI website, but that is where you can reach her. She's got all kinds of creative and interesting ways to help you figure out how to fund new programs. So if you can't do it where you are, leave and build it. Okay. So what I'd like to do is just give the panelists an opportunity to just give some last words that they want to share with the audience. There's quite a few people who are in attendance today and very keen on listening to your point of view. And so I just want you to take maybe about 30 seconds to a minute to just kind of reflect and leave them with something that's really important to you about this issue. So I'll start with Bill.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to say is that we've been talking here about recreational sailing, and there's more to it than that. We're a maritime nation. There are opportunities, career opportunities beyond the professional sail racers. I happen to be involved with SEA, which is a Sea Education Association out of Woods Hole. For those young people who are interested in careers in marine biology, oceanography, and that area, as well as the maritime academies, the merchant marine academies in Maine, Massachusetts, as well as California. I've had some dealings with those young people who started out with these little sailing clubs or had the opportunity to sail hoppies and graduate to that. So we have to look at it not as just a recreational thing, but also a stepping stone for our young people who want to go into an area which we are sorely in need of fresh blood, and that is to our maritime industry. And so I'd like to recommend those programs, and for young people to look at those. Start out with a yacht club, start out with a sailing club, find out if you love the water, and then you can find out that you can make it a career. And I've had the ability to deal with a couple of young people who've gone on through the academies and who are now out on some of the big ships making very, very good money. I wish I could have had that opportunity when I started out.
Thank you, Bill. What about you, Lou? Any last?
I think that there's three basic points that I would kind of focus on, and I think I said it earlier, but you really got to be very deliberate with a plan, and that plan is going to tell you what you want to do, how you're going to do it, and where you want to go. To Baxter's point earlier, you're going to run into resistance at times because change isn't always served well, and people don't take the change. Change management is probably one of the toughest things you're going to have to do because people feel that they might be losing something, but they're actually gaining more. And so it's a journey. Celebrate your victories. Sometimes there's a mountain climber saying that, sometimes you focus on how far you've got to go to the tip of the mountain, but all you have to do is look back down and see how far you've come. And that, I think, is a really big, a real big reminder that you have to make sure that you celebrate your victories and you look at your accomplishments. And then, last but not least, obviously, taking the path least traveled requires a lot of tenacity and a lot of perseverance. So, once you set that plan, don't give up on it, and make sure that, you do achieve those goals. If you say you're going to be a third diverse, set your path to get there and make sure you do it. So.
Thank you. And Joey?
So yeah, just sitting here, I was trying to figure out what wisdom I could impart on this, and that would be, something. I always say I was a terrible student. So when
he was
sit next to the Princeton and Harvard graduate here. So whenever I had to write a report, I would just be sitting at my desk, not knowing what to do and dreading it. And my mom would just encourage me to just start. And, as you go along, you can always change it to make it something that you want. So, these things are sometimes really hard to get going. And I think that's the best advice that I can give you is that, just start, evaluate it, a few months in, see what you need to change, see what other things that you can bring into it, what are other resources if possible. But if you keep going, eventually you'll be surprised at what you can build. So, that would be where I would go with it.
Yeah. And sort of similarly, our foundation, Jackson Park Yacht Club Foundation, came out with a diversity call to action on July 27th, which was the 101 anniversary of the Chicago race riots. The race riots actually kicked off. I mean, obviously there's some underlying stuff going on, but the race riots the spark that kind of made it happen was there was an African-American youth who accidentally swam into the all-white swimming area, and the beachgoers were appalled at that and basically stoned him until he drowned to death. They wouldn't let him get out of the water. And that's what sparked the race riots in 1919. We've come far since then, but we're still not as diverse as we should be. And people still don't have access to the water that they should. Everybody should. We all enjoy it, and I want to see more people enjoy it. And one of the things that I hear when people talk to me about diversity or when they call me to ask for advice is that they're afraid to start because they just don't know what to do. That's okay. We wouldn't be having this hour-long or almost hour-and-a-half long conversation if we knew the answers. But that doesn't mean we can't start it, right? We have to talk to each other, keep learning from each other, use the resource page, use the the leadership forum that U.S. Sailing has to continue this discussion. We'll continue the webinar so that we can drill down on some of these topics, but we can't just sit and do nothing, because if we do, we'll have another 100 years of nothing changing. So let's educate ourselves, let's talk, let's figure it out together and learn together and do something, because not doing anything is not going to change anything.
Yeah, I love that. I agree with everyone who's said a few words about like what is really important to them and what they want to leave everyone who's out there listening. And for me, I think we're having this gathering during unprecedented times, and so let's level up our ambition. I mean, this is a time we can make real change in sailing. There are so many people who are trying to figure out how they can make a difference and do things that they normally wouldn't focus on. And I think we have like this, the door is open here, and there's just a really great opportunity for us to widen it. There's peace that I think a lot of us find when we're out on the water, and it could be a very healing experience. And sharing this opportunity with other people really allows us to give that gift to others. And so let's do that. Let's figure out how we can use sailing as a way of healing. And it's also a great way to share an opportunity to feel empowered. As a woman, when you're out on the boat and it's you and it's nature and there's this huge vessel that you're figuring out how you can manipulate and move, that's a really empowering experience. And I think a lot of minorities, women, and groups that have been underrepresented or not been at the forefront of how our nation thinks about equality and things like that can use sailing as a way to feel more empowered. And I think to all the leaders that we have out there listening, and organizational heads who are here and want to figure out ways to open up sailing, I celebrate you. I think the first step was you tuning in tonight. And I know we have a lot more initiatives that will come through this platform to share ways we can be more diverse and make sailing a more open and welcoming space. So I just want to thank U.S. Sailing for hosting this important event. I want to thank our panelists for participating and giving their time tonight to share some of the really amazing and wonderful innovative programs you've developed and created, and some of the doors and the ceilings that have been broken by people like Bill Bill Pinkney, and some of the achievements that you, Lou, have been able to do. And then Karen, some of the awesome things that you're building out in Chicago, and also Joey, you all have done some really amazing things. So thank you for being with us tonight. And I want to just turn the program back over to US Sailing and have Peter come on board and close this out.
Thanks so much, Amy, and thank you for that was a very insightful and so much great information that was shared across so many different key areas. So thank you so much, and thanks to Karen, Joey, Lou, Bill, and Amy yourself. I mean, it was really a lot of value was gained, and I know there were a lot of people and a lot of questions. And, to your point, we look forward to, and as Karen said as well, we look forward to continuing the conversation and having folks come over to the US Sailing Leadership Forum Facebook group and continue to share resources, continue the conversation, ask questions, continue the dialogue, which, as Karen mentioned, it's important that we keep taking steps forward, and we certainly want to do so. Thanks everyone who tuned in and participated tonight. And with this, we're going to close out and wish everyone a nice evening.